I'll call this meeting of the State Board of Elections to order. First of all, I would request that any non-participants mute their lines when they're not participating in the meeting. Secretary will call the roll.
Chairman Brink.
Present.
Vice Chair O'Bannon.
Present.
Ms. Chang.
Here.
Delegate Merrick's.
Here.
Secretary Alvis Long present.
Okay, we have a quorum of 5 live people. Members of the department who are participating are led by Commissioner Beals. And from the Office of Attorney General, we have Joshua Leaf. Mr. Leaf, did you want to introduce anyone else?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have joined us this month. Named Travis Andrews, and he's basically dedicated full-time to elections. So we're thrilled to have him on board. I've already sent you out some of his work. He's already filed some pleadings. He's really getting up to speed quickly. So as you know, we had a bit of a void when Carol left. So we're really glad to have him on board and look forward. I'm sure you'll get a good chance to work with him. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the board. Your work with the Office of Attorney General has been very, very supportive of the board and the department, and I hope that you'll enjoy the relationship as much as we do. On public comment, at the conclusion of today's meeting, the board will go into closed session to receive the advice of counsel. Before going into closed session, the board will receive public comment on items not on today's agenda. Without objection, members of the public will be heard for 3 minutes and are welcome to submit statements for the record or questions seeking additional information on matters on this agenda to info@elections.virginia.gov. The first order of business is approval of the minutes from our meeting of August 16, 2022. Do the members have any questions or corrections to the minutes as presented? If not, Secretary Alvis Long, will you call the roll?
Chairman Brink.
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon.
Aye.
Ms. Chang. Delegate Merrick's.
Aye.
Georgia Alvis Long, aye.
The minutes are approved 5-0. The next order of business is
We didn't do a motion.
I'm sorry. All right, let us rewind that. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the August 16, 2022 meeting?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Secretary Alvis Long, will you call the roll, please?
Absolutely. Chairman Brink.
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon.
Aye.
Ms. Chang. Delegate Merrick's.
Aye.
Secretary Alvis Long, aye.
The minutes are approved 5-0. The next order of business is the Commissioner's report. Commissioner Beals?
Chairman Brink, Vice Chair O'Bannon, and members of the board, I have several items I wanted to update you on today. Recently, it was brought to our attention that ELECT is out of compliance on its use of the SAVE program. ELECT is required by the code to use the SAVE program as part of its list maintenance activities. Virginia Code Section 24.2-404E requires ELECT to participate in the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements program, which is operated by USCIS in the Department of Homeland Security for the purpose of verifying that voters listed in the Virginia voter registration system are United States citizens. Upon receiving inquiries from citizens and stakeholders, ELECT determined that it is out of compliance in its use of SAVE, and I wanted to update the board that ELECT is actively working to meet the code requirements related to SAVE. Since our last board meeting, ELECT staff has conducted research on the uses of the SAVE program. Staff has completed the SAVE training, and we have begun discussions with DMV about a path forward. ELECT is committed to implementing all of the processes and procedures that will ensure compliance with the code. Additionally, should ELECT need to propose any regulatory action, we would bring that before the board if it was deemed necessary. On redistricting, we have concluded redistricting for the November election, and we are in the process of mailing new voter notices to Virginia's 6 million registered voters. We want to make sure that voters take a look at this mailer when they receive it to see if their polling location may have changed. Due to the growth in the population over the last 10 years, there are some localities that had to add voting precincts. So their voting location that they may have had for the last 10 years may have changed. We are actively preparing for the November 8th election. As a reminder, Election Day is November 8th, and polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. The offices on the ballot this year include member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Every Virginian will have an opportunity to vote on that. And then some localities may have some local special elections in some cases. Early voting began last Friday. Early in-person voting is available to all Virginians at their general registrar's office during normal business hours for the 45 days leading up to the election. Curbside voting is also available during early voting to anyone with a disability or anyone who is 65 years or older. At the end of the day yesterday, after 2 days of early voting, 16,726 Virginians have voted early. 296,339 absentee ballots have been mailed to voters statewide and to our military and overseas voters. Of those absentee ballots that were requested, 4,696 have been returned to local registrar's offices to be processed. If a voter is interested in signing up to receive an absentee ballot, they can do that online now at elections.virginia.gov by clicking on casting a ballot at the top of the screen. Also wanted to just take a moment and talk about same-day registration, which is something that is new this year. The last day to register to vote in Virginia is October 17th. After that date, same-day registration will go into effect. So same-day registration will allow voters to register to vote and vote a provisional ballot. However, that ballot will not go into the voting machine at that time. Instead, the voter registration form and ballot will go back to the registrar's office where it will be researched for eligibility. The registrar will determine if the voter can be registered and will make a recommendation to the local electoral board on whether or not to count that ballot. Voters will be notified if their ballot is not counted. We do have some sad news to share here at Elect. A member of our team passed away last week unexpectedly. Warren Yance was a system support analyst with Elect. He was a joyful presence at Elect and was committed to serving others through his work. And we extend our deepest sympathies to Warren's family. We also do have some new hires at Elect that I wanted to highlight. We have 2 new team members. Claire Scott has joined our team as a policy analyst, and Brian Tynes has joined as media relations specialist. I think Claire is with us today, if you want to give a wave hello to the board. So please join me in welcoming them to Elect. We are happy to have them on board. And that is all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the members have any questions of the commissioner on the items that she brought up?
May I ask one question?
Certainly.
Sure. So, Madam Chairman, or what is your title?
Commissioner.
Commissioner Beals. The same day provisional or same day registration is brand new.
It is.
So everybody will be given a provisional ballot. It goes to the electoral board. Depending on what they decide, would there be, that person who did that ballot, will they be required to do anything additionally?
No, they will not. They do not need to come to a provisional ballot meeting.
So the EB will decide that yay or nay, and then it's all done.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and just following up on that, the electoral board will meet on the Friday following the Tuesday election?
Actually, I think most of them will be meeting the Monday after because
Monday.
the Friday is
That's right.
Veterans Day and that is a holiday.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions of the commissioner? If not, the next item on our agenda is finalization of board decisions from our August 16 meeting regarding stand by your ad infractions. Ms. Alexander?
Hello again. I am here to do the finalization of your initial decisions from the August 16th meeting for the two cases, one against Jamal Jackson, which was Jackson for Roanoke, and Velasquez for Roanoke, which was Peter Velasquez. Do you have any changes that you'd like to make, or are you good to sign the decisions?
These two individuals were, two
Mr.
individuals.
Jackson was fined $25 and Mr. Velasquez was fined $50.
All right. Do the members have any comments or questions of Ms. Alexander? Does any member of the public wish to be heard on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board finalize its August 16 decisions regarding violations of the stand by your ad provisions of the code.
I moved that the board finalize decision made on the true standby your ad violations assessed at August 16, 2022 State Board of Election.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the board finalize its August 16 decisions. Any additional questions or comments? If not, the secretary will call the roll.
Yes. Chairman Brink,
I vote aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick's,
Aye.
Secretary Alvis Long, aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. I'll see you after the meeting for your signatures. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. The next item of business is revision of the board's electronic meeting policy. Ms. Coles.
Hello, good afternoon, Chairman Brink, members of the board. It's good to be back. So in the 2020 session of the General Assembly, legislative session, the Freedom of Information Act provisions were amended regarding electronic meeting policies. So essentially, the code regarding electronic meeting policies is separated into two provisions. Meetings held during a declared state of emergency, and then meetings held not during a declared state of emergency. The provisions regarding meetings held during a declared state of emergency are exactly the same, so I'm not going to go over that for you. But for meetings held not during a declared state of emergency, they are divided into now two sections. Remote participation for individual members, and then an all virtual public meeting conducted by the board. Some more noticeable changes for this electronic policy. For meeting requests, we have that if a board member would like to request either an all virtual public meeting or to participate via remotely, that information is conveyed to the Department of Elections. Their elect will notify the chair member that this request was made, and that request will essentially be approved unless there are any objections. So this process was something that was recommended by the FOIA Council. So if there are any conflicts with the policy, so for example, an all virtual public meeting cannot be held consecutively. So if a member requests an all virtual public meeting when there was one previously held, that would be in conflict with the policy, and that would be a situation in which it wouldn't automatically be approved. If there is a situation in which a member requests individual remote participation or an all virtual public meeting, and it's not approved, then it will have a vote by the board at the meeting, and then that information is in the meeting minutes. Assuming all goes well and we have our electronic meetings or remote participation, that is also included in the meeting minutes. Notice is the same as any other traditional meeting, so you do have to provide that at a minimum of 3 days before. One thing that they did add with regard to remote participation for an individual member, they added the provision that if a member's principal residence is more than 60 miles from the meeting location identified in required notice of the meeting, you are allowed to request remote participation. And then as the last policy, if you are requesting remote participation for personal reasons, then that is limited to 2 meetings per calendar year, up to 25% of the meetings held per that year. And that is the highlights. Do we have any questions?
Okay, and the policy also includes, or the proposed policy also includes provisions for public participation, either at a remote location or electronically?
Absolutely. And so the board already permits remote participation electronically. So this does not change anything that we currently do. So electronic access has to be available to members of the public. They must be able to see and hear and allow for public comment at the same time public comment is customarily received.
Do the members have any questions or comments?
Can I ask Ashley?
Yeah.
So what is the bar for doing an all virtual meeting? Absent an emergency, is that just a?
That's a provision that's available to members of the board. So there is no bar beyond the fact that it cannot be held consecutively. And then there is, so for the 2 calendar meetings, this should not convene more than 2 times per calendar year or 25% of the meetings held in that calendar year, rounded up to the next whole number. But there is no particular reason or requirement.
Further question? So who is the decider?
So you will make your request to the Department of Elections. The department will inform the chair, and then according to this policy, it's automatically approved unless it's in conflict with this current policy. And that was a recommendation that was listed by the FOIA Council for guidelines for setting the policy.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions from the board? Does any member of the public wish to be heard on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the revised electronic meeting policy.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the proposed policy to conduct meetings through electronic communication means in compliance with section 2.2-3708.3D of the Code of Virginia.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the board approve the revised policy. Will the secretary call the roll?
Yes. Chairman O'Bannon. I did it again. Chairman Brink.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon.
Aye.
Ms. Chang. Delegate Merrick.
Aye.
Secretary Elvis Long, aye.
I have a business card for you.
Thank you.
Robert, you-
I see that. Thank you.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank
All
you.
right.
I'm going to put it.
Thank you, Ms. Coles. Then the next item of business is the State Board of Elections Annual Report. Can you walk us through this?
Yes, absolutely. So following the passage of legislation during the 2020 session of the General Assembly, the State Board is required to submit an annual report to the governor and the General Assembly on the activities of the board and elect. So this report will be posted on elect's website, and then it's available for any member of the General Assembly or the governor's office upon request. So I won't read the entire report to you, save the time, but we write a report for the calendar year, so from January 1st to December 31st of that year. So this report pertains to 2021. So in 2021, the board met a total of 12 times. You certified 4 elections, approved 4 new regulations, adopted 6 amendments to existing regulations, and 4 of those are a result of a periodic review. You assessed and addressed a variety of administrative matters as it pertains to hand counting ballot standards or officer of election training standards. You reviewed and updated certifications for 6 voting systems and/or electronic poll books, and defined penalties for stand by your ad. So you assessed a total of $650 in civil penalties. And that is the board's year in a very brief summary.
Thank you, Ms. Coles. Do the members have any comments or questions of Ms. Coles?
Just the one.
Okay. Secretary Elvis Long.
I did note, I was not part of this board last year, but I did notice there was a typo probably under election security, and it has on November 15th, 2022. So I think that hasn't occurred yet. It's probably 2021.
Oh, yes. Okay. We will make that change and then ensure that's updated. We have not posted this online yet because it's for the board's review, so we'll update it and then it'll be posted online.
Okay. What's the date of submission of this report?
October 1st to post online.
October 1st. Okay. All right. We'll diligently look at it for the next 2 days, and if we have any questions, we'll be sure to get back to you.
Yeah, and
does-
this report does summarize the activities of the board that are also available on Town Hall. So this correlates exactly with our meeting minutes and meeting agendas as well.
Thank you. Does any member of the public wish to be heard on this item?
I have a question. If in the state report, when we come up, if in the state report, there is an enumeration of the appropriations given by the General Assembly for the operation of the Department of Elections, and then specifically also for amounts of money that the Department of Elections forwards on to the counties and the cities for the procurement of electronic voting computer systems, for their maintenance and for training in the proper use of those systems. And I wondered if that is part of the annual report. Thank you.
Are there any additional members of the public who wish to be heard? This is not an item on which board action is needed, rather is an information item. And thank you, Ms. Coles, for presenting. Next item on our agenda is the risk limiting audit manual. Ms. Hoyt-Stewart and Ms. Lawless.
Good afternoon, members of the board. We come before you again to talk about risk limiting audits. Today, we are presenting the 2022 Risk Limiting Audit Manual. You may recall that passed during the 2022 General Assembly session, Virginia made several changes related to risk limiting audits. One of the changes was that we were tasked with putting together a manual that covered lots of processes and procedures. The manual builds on previous guidance issued by the department. Elect hosted two statutorily required work groups this summer on risk limiting audits. They were held Tuesday, July 19th and Tuesday, August 23rd. The work groups took into account suggestions from the field on improvements on processes and procedures, and those were incorporated in this manual. So I just want to say thank you to those folks. There were about 13 members from the community that donated their time and their ideas to making this existing manual functional. So the proposed 2022 Risk Limiting Audit Manual provides all the necessary procedural guidance required under 24.2-641.2B of the Code of Virginia. On that note, I will take any questions you may have.
Okay, do the members have any questions of Ms. Hoyt-Stewart or Ms. Lawless? Now, as I understand, Dr. O'Bannon.
Well, we were having a little chat earlier, and I was interested in trying to get the best value out of risk limiting audits. And I understand the parameters, but I also see that the language here is that we, state board, get to pick which race to be audited, but it must be randomly selected.
Correct. And under E, as we discussed, those races, there must be a margin greater than 1%.
I understand that. But I mean, what's the definition of random? Not asking for you to respond. The whole point is, we don't get to make a whole lot of decisions, but unfortunately, it appears as if we can't choose to pick a race that's maybe not a 10-point race, but maybe a 5 or 2.5-point race, which I think would give a little more value to the audit. But that's just a comment, since we already have the legislation.
Well, last year when we did the delegates, it was random in a sense of, but we did an evaluation of the different races. So we had a good feel for the contest, and we limited it down to, I think it was 5. And then we eventually had 2. But this one, the law says it's randomly. So we have 11 opportunities.
And this is the one that has to be done before certification.
Correct.
So everybody needs to understand that.
So on going forward, on November 16, we will have,
The random draw.
we'll meet electronically and do the random drawing for the races that are selected. And this will push certification back to December 5, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So now,
Dr.
another
Bynum?
question. How are we going to use the little canisters and the crystal bowl electronically?
I wondered that.
Well, you could appoint a member of elect staff. Everything will be on camera, so it'll be transparent. So you could designate perhaps the commissioner to draw for you, or however you want to do it. That is also written into the manual.
And I believe I saw a YouTube that presented the visualization of the selection, so we'll be well taken care of. Any additional questions or comments from members of the board? Does any member of the public wish to be heard on this item?
Yes, I do.
Uh, yeah. Okay, would you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is James Jones from Henrico County, and I have some comments about the risk limiting audit manual.
Proceed.
The risk limiting audit is misnamed as it's not an audit at all. It's merely a statistical review of a very small sample of ballots. I go back to the 2020 election risk limiting audit, where 1,200 ballots out of 4 million were examined, and the determination was that the election was totally fair and honest and correct, and generated a 13-page report. Now, the risk limiting audit is a creation of academia at University of California at Berkeley, and it's merely been set up to provide cover for election officials. If you'll refer to page 8 in the report, at the very bottom, it mentions the Democracy Fund and a Miss Jennifer Morrell. The Democracy Fund is a left-wing nonprofit organization who is funded by many organizations, including Soros, and Miss Morrell is a progressive election official. If you would refer to page 11, the program that you're going to use is called Arlo, which is provided by an organization called Voting Works, which came out of the incubation of an organization called the Center for Democracy and Technology. I mention all of these because what we're seeing around the country is an infiltration of these left-wing nonprofit organizations, and one of the ways they're doing it is with these risk-limiting audits. And you know, they're not really audits. Like I said, they're more of a statistical review of a very small sample size. As a matter of fact, I was told that the larger the percentage of victory, the smaller the percentage of sample. And you know, it isn't just me. Philip Stark, who is one of the originators of the risk limiting audit, resigned from an organization called Verified Voting, which is the left-wing nonprofit organization that is promoting these risk limiting audits. And he said that he was very upset with what had happened with the risk limiting audits. It has been providing cover for inherently untrustworthy voting systems. He goes on to say that it's more important to be sure that our paper trail of ballots is more secure than to do a very small sampling in a risk limiting audit. And so what he's saying in his resignation letter is the intent of what he developed in all good faith has changed dramatically in that it is now a statistical review. It's not an audit by any means, providing cover for election officials. And it is something that we never should have put into law here in Virginia. However, it is in law, and I think you should take a close look at what organizations are behind these risk limiting audits. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones. Does any other member of the public wish to be heard?
In regard to the risk limiting audit, and he mentioned Philip Stark. Philip Stark has a federal lawsuit in, I think, DC District against the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, which is the same entity that provides the certifications, false certifications of the electronic voting machines that we use in Virginia. In addition, Mr. Stark was with Verified Voting, and as he said, but there is a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to be heard?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Would
My
you
name is Darrell
come
Bowe.
to the podium and identify yourself?
My name is Darrell Bowe. I'm from Spotsylvania County. Thank God for the Secretary of State of Kansas who did a random selection on a race this year. If he hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have known that the machines actually flipped the votes in a race, and they were doing paper hand count ballots rather than a risk limit. If they would have done a risk limit, they would have never known that a race had been flipped as a result of the machines. We need a paper hand count. We need the machines to go away. And we need to know with reassurance that our voice counts in our elections. We need hand count, paper hand count, no machines. The risk limit audit is the worst thing you can do to reassure the public that their voice counts. 1,372 votes that the gentleman mentioned earlier was used in the 2020 election to determine that we had a clean and fair election. We need hand count. We needed reassurance that our voice is being heard. Transparency is great to restore confidence. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.
I forgot one thing that I meant to, I forgot.
Does any other member of the public wish to be heard? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the proposed risk limiting audit manual.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. O'Bannon,
I move the board approve the proposed risk limiting audit manual pursuant to 24.2, 671.2B. I'd like to just briefly speak to that.
please do. Let's get a second first. Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Dr. O'Bannon?
So I had a couple of questions. I have to remind everybody that we're acting based on what the General Assembly did last session. And so the remedy for this is not with us. And I assume these last two reports have generated a lot of work hours at the Department of Elections. So both of them are a lot of pages long. So I'm going to move that we adopt this. Thank you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the board approve the proposed risk limiting audit manual. Will the secretary call the roll?
Yes. Chairman Brink,
I vote aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick's,
Aye.
Secretary Elvis Long, aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item of business is certification of ballot on demand systems. Ms. Hoyt Stewart?
Yes, as you remember, I came before you last month and asked you to approve the standards for the ballot on demand, and you did. So we went out and we tested state with the local officials, and we went out and tested in several jurisdictions, lots of them, to make sure the systems were certified. What we ask is that you certify them to the date that we were tested, because we want to make sure the certifications are valid before this early voting period. So that's why we put in the certification date and ask for your approval for that as of the date on the bottom of the certifications. We have 4 vendors: Dimtech, No Inc., Election Systems and Software, and Hart InterCivic, who have ballot on demand systems.
Thank you, Ms. Hoyt Stewart. How many different systems did you say?
There's 4 different systems, but we tested like in multiple locations with the different systems, because 2 of our vendors are poll books. And so we wanted to make sure they are not quote unquote voting systems. They don't have the voting systems, but they were able to print the ballots and pull them up, print the ballots, and the voter could vote. Everything came out perfect.
Thank you. Do the members have any questions of Ms. Hoyt Stewart? Does any member of the public wish to be heard on this item?
Yes, I do.
Would you identify yourself, please?
James Jones from Henrico County.
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I read the report from Henrico County, and I just happened to have been there to vote early last Friday. And some of the equipment involved in this brand new process of ballot on demand, because of the many ballot styles, is missing in the testing. There's an iPad. The iPad scans a license. There's a wireless thermal printer, and then there's a wireless ballot on demand printer. It appears from the reports that it only checked the ballot on demand printer and the iPad. And the configuration is a concern to many people who have an IT background, which I do not, but others I have spoken to have said that entire Wi-Fi system is very vulnerable. And just for information purposes, you should start looking at how you can harden those Wi-Fi networks in the early voting areas. The only other question I have is, and it's not a question because I know you don't answer questions, but I'm curious why Henrico County has multiple locations for early voting. Obviously, they have the ballot on demand printers at various locations, and there were two where I was in the West End office, but I only see two printers on the report. So I guess another concern would be, were all of them tested, or was this, to use today's word, just a random selection of equipment to test? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any other member of the public wish to be heard on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the ballot on demand system certifications.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the ballot on demand system certifications listed affected on the dates on the testing certification.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that the board approve the ballot on demand system certifications listed effective on the dates on the testing certifications. Secretary will call the roll.
Yes. Chairman Brink,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick's,
Aye.
Secretary Alvis Long, aye.
The motion passes 5-0. Our next item of business is extension of the authorization for localities to use electronic poll books. Ms. Hoyt-Stewart?
Yeah, the need here is, I remember when we came before the board in 2020, we, in expanding the new standards for the poll books and for the voting systems, and we had concerns about budgeting for the localities and being able to comply on time, and we were reasonably confident we were going to be okay. However, we find that there's about a little over a dozen localities who had a harder time getting it through their budget process and supply chain issues to be able to get the new certified electronic poll books and the software. However, they've been using these electronic poll books for years in elections. This is not in a satellite location, so it does not need connectivity like that secure connectivity that we require for satellites. This is to continue using their poll books for one more election day with the prior version of their software. And they are under so much stress trying to deal with the fact they got the budgeting money, getting the new equipment. So that's why we're appropriately asking for an extension for them for one more election.
So as I understand it, this would permit those 14 localities to use their electronic poll books for check-in for the November election. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Do the members have any questions of Ms. Hoyt-Stewart?
I do. I have one.
Secretary Alvis Long.
Question, what's the consequence if they don't upgrade by the next election?
They have to use paper poll books then, and they would have to go revert back. They've been using electronic poll books for years, and this version. The problem is the new version with the supply chain and also their budgets, they just could not get it in place in time to feel comfortable serving the public. They know the other system is solid, it works, they can check in voters and they'll be good. It's just they need a little bit more time to come up to the new certified version.
But again, what happens if they don't? They just have to go back to the paper?
They would have to go back to paper poll books. Yeah. And we already have, I think, 12 localities who use paper poll books.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Additional questions of Ms. Hoyt-Stewart? Do any members of the public wish to be heard on this matter? Yes, sir. Would you identify yourself, please?
Yes, sir. Darrell Bowe from Spotsylvania County. The paper poll books, I actually did a little research on this myself. since verifiedvoting.org posted that 17 counties still use the paper poll books. So I did a little researching. Since the General Assembly passed a law, starting November 1st, 2020, you're supposed to be using electronic poll books. But we still have counties that are using paper poll books. Are we going to go out and charge them for violating the code? The point that I'm trying to make is that you just pointed out that the General Assembly is responsible for passing a law for the risk limit audits. They also passed a law that said that you're supposed to have electronic poll books. Is this board going to pay for those since those counties can't afford to get their board of supervisors to pay for it? Is this board going to pay for that for them to comply with the code? The point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to emphasize that it's the responsibility of the General Assembly that passed the risk limit audits, they also passed this law stating the facts that they're supposed to be using electronic poll books, and they're not. They can't afford it, first of all. They have to wait for the Board of Supervisors to give them the finances and everything else. Obviously, we know they're not going to go out and prosecute them for violating the code. We need transparency. We need the paper poll books to be used in all counties, no electronics, no tabulators, paper hand count only. That brings transparency. It brings back a confidence in our electoral process. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public wish to be heard on this matter? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the use of electronic poll books by specified localities for the specified purpose.
I move that the board approve extension to the following localities to use the current electronic poll books for voter checking on election day for November 2022 general election.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the board approve the use of electronic poll books by specified localities for the specified purpose. Secretary Elvis Long, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Chairman Brink,
I vote aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick,
Aye.
Secretary Elvis Long, aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Can I say something?
Dr. O'Bannon?
You might want to notify those localities, this may be their last extension.
Oh, yeah, they know that.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hoyt-Stewart. Before we go into closed session, we have individuals who wish to be heard on items that are not on today's agenda. In person before electronic? All right. Okay, Mr. Darrell, is it Bowe? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bowe from Spotsylvania County. Got my little binder here. I was here last month as well. Had two binders with me that time, but we'll just stick with one this time since I've got a limited amount of time. Last time we talked about Clay Parikh when we were here. He testified in a federal district court in Arizona, a former pro VMV employee who is one of those guys that certify your election machines. Well, I want to move on from that topic into the ICS advisories, the CISA, which is the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a federal agency. They knew about the vulnerabilities of these systems, as well as EAC, which is responsible for certifying your election machines. The EAC, Elections Assistance Commission, they knew about these vulnerabilities. It was in his reports. He stated in the federal district court. And so they knew these vulnerabilities existed, and they put out these advisories this year. They've been putting out a lot of them, actually. They put out one in May 27, 2022. It says, a new rumor versus reality. The existence of vulnerability in election technology is not evidence that the vulnerability has been exploited or that the results of an election have been impacted. Technology has vulnerabilities. Identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities is an important security practice. The reason why they're putting these reports out, Mr. Chairman, is because of all the numerous reports of vote manipulation. For example, Cherokee, Kansas was one example that I just gave you a few minutes ago. The other report is report number 3 out of Mesa County, Colorado. This report specifically states that the elections of 2020 and April 2021 were altered. And so that report shows for a fact that the vulnerabilities that they know exist are still there today. And those manipulations of the machines are being used to alter our elections. The whole state of Colorado uses the exact same machines, Dominion voting machines. If I remember correctly, 10% of our counties in the state of Virginia use Dominion voting machines. The question is, are those vulnerabilities in our machines? Has anybody bothered to take the time to see if they're there or not? I also have report number, this one's from the Secretary of State of California. 2013, they called in a red team to analyze the Dominion voting machines. They identified the vulnerabilities in those machines. Some were fixed, others were not. The vulnerability that was left in that machine is still in existence today. And report number 3 from Mesa County, Colorado shows for a fact that that evidence is still in existence. Correction, that's report number 2, that shows that vulnerability is still there to this day. And it's on page 34 if anyone should bother to want to read the report. I believe the commissioner has this report, report number 2, and the California report, because my registrar supposedly was supposed to email or forward that to her. The points that I'm trying to make, Mr. Chairman, is that our systems are vulnerable. They do have vulnerabilities. Even CISA has admitted to it. And the reason why they're admitting to it is because of the report coming out of Georgia that has not been released by the federal.
Okay, can you wrap up, please?
Yes, sir. By the federal district court judge. She refuses to release the report to the public because the report is so damning.
Thank you.
Of the dangers of the machines and the vulnerabilities.
Mr. Teal, Paul
Thank you,
Teal.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for pronouncing my name properly. A lot of people say Theo.
Teal?
Teal.
Teal.
You got it right.
All right. I
Thank
got
you.
to, I'll
And I
leave it there.
appreciate all your time and everything that you do as a board. It's not easy, I understand. Just a quick reference, real quick, to the risk limiting audit. We see it as just feel-good action. They're false. But what I'm going to get into is a different tack totally. How did I get involved in this? I'm just a little old businessman from Hanover County. I built some businesses, I patented some products and that kind of stuff. But when somebody comes to me and shows me fractional votes, and I start doing the research on this, I have to wonder. If you will look at the timestamp data, this particular one, I've got a copy of that for everybody in a folder here. If you will look down the column here, which talks about the percentages of the votes for the batch total for Biden and batch total for Trump, and you will look at the percentages over in the last column. After the entries noted above were recorded, nearly every entry made into the system for the presidential election had the same proportion of votes Biden to Trump. This is not reasonable. It's impossible. There's nothing random about this. It's highly, highly unlikely that the results of these entries would be at the same proportion. This too indicates fraud. I'd like to, in the packet is Fulton County, Fulton County, Pennsylvania has sued the sued their Board of Elections to get rid of the machines. I have here in the folder, I have copies of machines we've purchased and had opened to look at. So that's very controversial, but although these pictures in your folder is an ES 100, we're using 200s and more. The ES 100 had 155 pages of instructions for your registrars. The newer ones have 250 pages of instructions. How many of those registrars know how to do that? They don't. They call in Dominion. They call into Fox to guard the hen house. That sounds harsh, but that's what's happening. President Trump was winning the race, and this is a Gateway Pundit, a very reputable outfit that's done a lot of research and written books. This is more recent from them. President Trump was winning the race in Virginia all night on election day. Every report showed the president way up in the presidential race. Then suddenly, while the president was still ahead, big media declared Joe Biden the winner. A judge's new ruling demands that this state have a forensic audit of results performed now. We've reported on Virginia's question results in the 2020 election already. There were 378 separate entries or feeds related to the presidential race in Virginia. And this is the New York, of the entries of the first 25 entries reported in the New York Times data feed related to Virginia were basically reasonable. The results
Neal,
vary.
can you wrap up, please?
I need about a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't ask any questions over there. Overall, 3 entries of 300,000 votes were posted in the database to Biden's vote total. 2 entries of over 300,000 votes were taken away. The same happened to President Trump's total, but in much smaller amounts. Overall, 851,000 votes were added to Biden's totals, and only 318,000 were added
If
to
you
President
wish, you
Trump's.
can submit material for
I
the
have
record.
this material in folders for
All
you.
right, thank you.
Very, very
Mr. Manship?
questionable. Let me get out of your way, George. Where can I leave these to pass them out? Good afternoon. As a mild-mannered reporter, I, James Manship, appear before you today as the spirit of President Washington, who warned of innovations that would undermine or overthrow this Constitution. Yet in my journalist investigations, I spied a story that a key driver in this Virginia Board of Elections emergency meeting vote on 8 September 2017 to prohibit a class of voting computers was none other than former Democrat Governor Terry McAuliffe, who appointed 2 of the then 3 board members. In episode 7 of Turn, Washington Spies, McAuliffe appeared in 2016 as the Virginia Militia General Lawson. And in the same episode, I, as the spirit of George Washington, was seen as a witness in the room at the court-martial trial brought by my former aide-de-camp, Colonel Joseph Reed, who in 1775 wrote a letter describing our first Navy flag to be a Liberty Tree flag with the motto, "Appeal to Heaven." Reed returned to Philadelphia and was elected the 3rd president or governor of Pennsylvania after Ben Franklin was first. Reed called a court-martial for profiteering by Benedict Arnold, a later known traitor to America. Somehow that turn may be heaven sent because the profiteering on the sales and dishonesty denying many flaws of voting computers is in many ways just as traitorous as the profiteering of Benedict Arnold. McAuliffe saw on the voting computer screen his vote flip to a Republican. McAuliffe then wasted $28 million to replace the flawed touchscreen computer systems with just as flawed vote scanners where no votes are seen. And his Democrat majority Board of Elections voted to ban or prohibit the use in Virginia of any of one class of voting computers, the DRE touchscreen voting computers, that at least hinted how your vote was counted. With electronic vote scanners, the process is invisible, an insidious innovation that election after election is undermining or overthrowing our republic defined in this Constitution for the United States of America. Unless hand counted, paper ballots are just window dressing. Paper ballots are show, if not hand counted. Paper ballots become somewhat of a part of an ongoing deception in our electronic selection versus election process. America's ally, France, does hand counting of paper ballots on election day. Another heaven-sent item I received after I spoke with you on 16 August, on 26 August from Mr. Bowe, I received a 2-minute, 20-second video of Georgia's DeKalb County nearly suffered a stolen election due to voter scanner 2810 votes short and 3,620 votes wrongly assigned. Only a citizen demanded hand counts saved that election. I have included that great video in my 5-minute Rumble video. George exposes Georgia nearly stolen election and a certified
Can you
hacker.
wrap up, please?
All right. And so I also have for you today information from a hacker, the certified hacker, and he is willing to come and speak to
Thank you,
you
Mr. Manship.
to teach you about true security. Thank you.
We have 4 speakers who wish to comment electronically. First is Jeffrey Shapiro.
Thank you very much. This will not take too long, and thank you for recognizing me. I wanted to comment. I'm the Fairfax County Republican Committee liaison to the Fairfax County Election Board. And we have gone over the issue numerous times with different people asking questions. The first time with me asking questions as to whether the system that has been set up is capable of detecting illegal aliens who register to vote. And it is apparent from the discussions we've had in detail, and I'm not going to go through it all here, with everyone on the phone, that the system, and particularly the registrations coming in through the DMV, is not checking for the citizenship status of people who registered to vote. And that's particularly concerning in the DMV context, where a lot of the registrations come in. And every time we go through this with the meetings, I asked my questions a year ago. Now new people come, and no one can believe this, but it's actually true. The only safeguard that the Fairfax board can point to is that it's some of the forms are done under penalty of perjury. That's inadequate, especially because there are no prosecutions. So effectively, it's an honor system. And I think the Fairfax board has indicated that it's above their pay grade. And I think that this board, the State Board of Election, has a responsibility and a duty to fix that. I understand that the SAVE statute actually required you to do it many years ago, and it hasn't been done. And I think that I would recommend that you take an end-to-end look at the system, look at all the points of entry for registrations, and figure out how you're going to check citizenship status. The databases are out there, and you have a duty and an obligation, because if non-citizens can vote, we don't have a country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Is Timothy Krobuth on the line? Ms. Tyson, are we able to,
Mr. Kroboff, you can speak.
we'll go on to the next speaker, and if Mr. Krobuth. Right, okay. All right, the next person on our list is Ned Jones. Is Mr. Jones
thank you.
available?
Yeah, thank you. James Jones again from Henrico County. There's another one of these nonprofit organizations that I've been tracking for 2 years. It's called the Center for Voter Information, also known as the Voter Participation Center. And they do the third-party, partially filled out absentee ballot application mass mailings in the states. This year, I did a FOIA request and received the information for the 2022 election. And I wrote a letter to Ms. Beals on August 9th, a follow-up in September. And having no response, I'm going to read it quickly so it's in the record of your minutes. Dear Commissioner Beals, I recently received a copy of your excellent 4/21/22 email to Sarah Mitchell at the Voter Participation Center. In that email, you pointed out many of the issues that have come up with their past mass mailings in Virginia. I also have their response, ignoring all of your concerns. I have other concerns with their mass mailings. You may recall that last year they did a statewide mass mailing of partially populated absentee ballot applications to over 2 million Virginia voters. Many of these applications were submitted to Fairfax County and maybe other locations without the last 4 of the Social Security number. The registrar in Fairfax County accepted many of these incomplete applications. I suggest that you alert the registrars in the locations where CVI and PCP, as they're known, are doing the mass mailings this year about this issue. In Ms. Mitchell's response to you dated June 30, 2022, she indicates that their focus is a special focus on the new American majority consisting of young people, communities of color, and unmarried women. As I mentioned, last year they had the same focus and mailed out over 2 million partially populated absentee ballot applications to Virginia voters. This year, with the same focus, they only mailed out 169,108 applications, and only in CD2 and CD7. And I have a spreadsheet that I sent to Ms. Beals. Are their target voters only in those districts? Why should 16% of the voters in those districts be treated differently than all the other voters in the state? We should have equal treatment of all voters. They've been given 2 opportunities to request their ballot. And there's one last point, another point about these mailings. CBI and VPC do not get the undeliverables in their mass mailings back from the Postal Service. They get a list of undeliverables with the name and address of the voter and the reason why the mailer could not be delivered. The voter has died, moved, married, etc. This year, they will get a list of voters not at their address in CD2 and CD7. You have the same list. Earlier this year, a new voter registration card was sent to every voter. The undeliverables in 2 and 7 should be the same voters on the list that was provided to CVI and VPC by the USPS.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Can I finish? The other guy got 4 minutes. It's only one sentence. Did you?
One sentence.
I did see that you pointed out that they had not purchased a voter list from the state for at least 2 years. Did they purchase a new list for the mass mailings in July? The State Department of Elections provides
Thank you,
ample
Mr.
opportunities
Jones.
for voters in Virginia to get mail-in ballots.
Is Mr. Crowbeth on the line?
Mr. Crowbeth, are you able to speak?
I think I saw him appear in the chat.
I believe he still haven't.
All right. Our next speaker is Anne Gregorian.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon. Thank you for calling on me today. First, I want to thank Commissioner Beals for updating everybody on the SAVES program. I look forward to future updates, and hopefully that program can be up and running prior to the November 8th election for list maintenance. But today I wanted to bring to your attention that I recently sent to you a copy of correspondence submitted to the Newport News Electoral Board and the Newport News Registrar, objecting to being removed from mandatory poll book training in that district. It's my understanding that my name was submitted on a list of election officials in February by the Republican City Committee Chair to the Newport News Electoral Board as provided by law. I would refer the board to my letter for a statement of qualifications as a declared representative of the Republican Party and a duly appointed officer of election in the city of Newport News. This training is being conducted as required by law because a new poll book system is being put in place for the general election. I have concerns that the legal requirement of parity in the polls is being ignored in Newport News. Without this mandatory training, I will effectively be disqualified from working in the polls as a declared representative of the Republican Party. I am sure this board fully understands the difference between an election official who is designated to represent a party just for the day and an election official who declares to represent a particular party in every single election. They are not equal for the purposes of parity. Newport News is heavily Democrat district. I have submitted my concerns to the RPV and the Newport News Republican Committee Chair. While the Republican Party has a legal right to demand parity, the State Board of Elections is tasked with oversight of the actions of local electoral boards. As it is your legal obligation to ensure that major risks to election integrity are identified, assessed, and addressed as necessary to promote election uniformity, legality, and purity, I request that an inquiry be made of the Newport News Electoral Board as to the status of true parity in the upcoming elections. I thank you for your time and attention to these concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Gregorian. Do we still have audio problems with Mr. Crowbeth? All right. Our next speaker then is Clarabelle Wheeler. Dr. Wheeler?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the community. There seems to be some revision. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
I'm sorry, I'm getting
Almost too good.
feedback. Okay. I have two questions for you this afternoon, which are very simple. One, several years ago, the State Board of Elections, you of which were the chairman, Mr. Brink, advised, excuse me, I'm having a lot of trouble talking where there's feedback. An advisory panel. My question to you is, has the membership of that panel changed over this past summer? Or is it still the same membership as it was before the General Assembly concluded the 2022 session?
Can we hold for a moment?
Excuse me, Clarabelle,
Yes.
can you mute? I believe you have two lines on. Can you mute one of the lines? Hey, are you able to turn the volume down?
I'm sorry to be upset. Is that working now? No, it's not. Yes?
Yes, that sounds better.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Sorry for the interruption.
Well, I'm very sorry that, anyway, you appointed an advisory panel, and I need to know if it's the same membership as it was a year ago, or if it's changed. That's one question. Can you answer that?
If you have any questions, you can submit those questions to info@elections.virginia.gov.
Okay, then I will proceed to my next inquiry, and I guess I'll send it to the same email address. The same-day registration and voting regulations begin in Virginia on the 1st of October. To my knowledge, there's been no announcement to the electoral boards for oversight, the registrars, the webinar, but the public actually has no oversight. How would I go about getting information on what the regulations are that the commissioner has outlined?
Did you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I'm asking the commissioner how to get information on the regulations for same-day registration and voting.
As I noted before, if you have any questions, you could submit those questions to info@elections.virginia.gov. Do you have any additional comments?
My comment is that the public won't have any idea about the response that I get. I think the public is due notification on these regulations. Thank you.
All right. Is Mr. Crowbeth available?
Mr. Crowland, are you able to speak?
All right, we'll hold out hope for Mr. Crowbeth and go to Maggie Luca. Is Ms. Luca available?
Did you call my name?
I did.
I did not have my hand raised or anything. I'm just attending the meeting. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. One final chance for Mr. Crowbeth. All right. Does any other member of the public wish to be heard? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the board go into closed session to receive the advice of counsel.
Mr. Chairman, I move in pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A7. I move that the board go into closed session for the purpose of discussing pending and threatened litigation in accordance with Section 2.2-3712F. Susan Beals, Commissioner of Elections, Joshua Leaf of the Office of the Attorney General, Travis Andrews of the Office of the Attorney General, and Lynn McDermott, Secretary of Administration, will attend the closed session because their presence will reasonably aid the board in its consideration of the subject of the meeting.
It's been moved that the board go into closed session for the specified purpose. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Will the secretary call the roll?
Yes. Chairman Brink,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon. Aye. Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick's,
Aye.
Secretary Alvis Long, aye.
The motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. O'Bannon.
I move to reconvene the meeting in open session, take a roll call vote certifying that to the best of each member's knowledge, only such public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under this chapter, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard or discussed by the State Board of Elections.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to reconvene the meeting in open session. Secretary Ellis Long, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Chairman Brink,
Aye.
Vice Chair O'Bannon.
Aye.
Ms. Chang, Delegate Merrick's.
Aye.
Secretary Alvis Long, aye.
Motion passes 5-0. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned.
Y'all need to sign something for Tammy.